I know we did characters last time, as in all the different ways to read the characters from Encanto and all the different issues they've got going, but I wanted to look at the big English teacher guide to what role the characters have in the story. So we've got our antagonist. It's important to remember that the antagonist isn't necessarily a villain, isn't necessarily evil. The antagonist is the one stopping our main character from getting what they want. Therefore, an antagonist could be the rule system in place. It could be a parent who says you're not old enough. It could be somebody at the DMV who says, sorry, those are the rules, you can't drive a car yet. It could be anybody or anything, but doesn't have to be evil. I notice in the parentheses I've got words like arch-villain, but still. The obstacle toward the protagonist getting what they want. Hamilton is battling Jefferson. Hamilton is battling Burr. And Hamilton finally takes his strike and destroys Burr and makes Jefferson president of the United States in such an ironic, twisted moment. Antihero. An antihero would be when the protagonist isn't a very nice person, is a grouch, is a former bad guy, is a current bad guy. There has to be some reason we're following this person, so they're generally at least somewhat likable, or very likable. Deadpool, arguably Wolverine, Joker in the Joker movie, Cruella in the Cruella movie. We've got a number of, not heroes, but they're the main characters. Hamilton, of course, is heroic. He's a good guy. He's trying to do good things. But in the moments where we're following Burr as our main person in the story for a little while, Burr is giving the impression that he would do all kinds of unscrupulous things to bring down Hamilton. Character arc. How our character grows and changes in the story. Hamilton is a teenage immigrant when he shows up with a really big mouth. And as the story goes on, he accepts responsibilities, he marries, he has a kid, he cares about the kid, he goes from being a soldier to a politician, and he also slowly learns how to compromise with Jefferson and make deals instead of just picking fights. And he creates large sections of the American government. Characterization, giving people all kinds of qualities. Favorite foods, expressions, ways of drumming their fingers, backstories, anything at all that gives this person more personality. And you can do direct, where the character says, my mother died, or I don't want to have this affair. Or you could have indirect, where Hamilton says he doesn't want to have the affair, but he kind of acts like he does. Or Hamilton wears glasses to the duel and we're left to guess why, because it doesn't say directly, so we have to intuit whether Hamilton is the sort of person who really did put on glasses in order to shoot at Burr, or if he put on glasses for some other reason, like you'd have to be pretty dumb to go to a duel and not wear glasses, or he wanted to see Burr's face and see if Burr was going to shoot at him, or something. And we can use bits of evidence from the story, but it never directly says. Caricature, a very exaggerated figure, usually so we can mock them, not somebody we're supposed to take seriously. King George. King George is goofy, he's really immature and grasping, he isn't thoughtful, he has a tantrum on stage, kind of, sort of. He's a caricature. We are not supposed to respect him in any way, sure. A dynamic character or round character. This is a fully rounded person, somebody who grows and changes, hence dynamic, and learns, and we follow them and feel sympathy for them, but they're a full person. We see Hamilton growing and changing and learning. We see Burr growing and changing and learning. Most of the other characters are pretty much stuck as they are for the whole thing. Eliza grows a bit. She doesn't change her role that much, but some characters, like Jefferson, are pretty much the same from beginning to end of this thing. Fatal flaw. This is going back to the Greek tragedies, where the characters have everything they need to succeed except one thing, like being really arrogant, that's going to destroy them somewhere in the story. Well, we still write like that, and of course, Hamilton does have his fatal flaw. He refuses to apologize. He won't back down from Burr. He won't back down from Hamilton, from Jefferson. He's so sure he's right. And this leads him to duels, that leads him to getting killed. And his strengths, honesty and being able to write so much, also become tragic weaknesses when he assumes that he can't do anything wrong, and just being honest with everyone and writing this really long thing will get him out of trouble, which is not how it works, of course. We talked about a dynamic or round character. The opposite would be a flat or static character. One-note personality trait. Like the person who's always going to say something nasty, or the person who's always going to say something perky and supportive. Hamilton's three buddies at the beginning always take roughly the same roles. Peggy, the king, Seabury are only there to do one job, and so they do. We don't see them learning and growing and changing, just doing their one thing, and that's it. Foil. Often the antagonist, somebody who keeps clashing with another character, quite often the protagonist, and as they keep butting heads and bouncing off each other, they're both learning and growing and changing through this process. Hamilton is the protagonist and Burr's the villain, sure, but they keep not just bouncing off each other, but also paralleling. They're linked, like Harry and Voldemort, or even more so, Harry and Draco, as they're growing up together and learning together, or Elphaba and Glinda. These two are both prodigies, orphans, Revolutionary War heroes, and they can't stop comparing each other and being jealous of what the other one has. They have these opposite philosophies as Hamilton leaps into everything and Burr holds back, but by the end, they're using each other's strategies to succeed in life. And of course, just because of their final actions, it really could have gone a different way, but Hamilton becomes a hero forever and Burr becomes a villain forever. Some other foils might be Lafayette and Hercules Mulligan get replaced by Jefferson and Madison, who are both oh so cautious and don't leap into anything. And they go from being Hamilton's best friends to being Hamilton's enemies, of course. They even speak differently, act differently, totally different attitudes, obviously different clothes. Many, many books have contrasted King George and George Washington as these total opposites, although they both come from a British background, they're both leaders, and so forth. And a final pair of foils that we could put together are Angelica and Eliza, who obviously grew up together and share so much of an origin story and a love for Hamilton, but they're making opposite choices with opposite personalities in this story, and thus emphasizing the different paths they could take, even as they consider rubbing off on each other. Minor characters. Obviously, there are many minor characters in the story who don't really have an effect on the main characters or learn or grow. Eliza's father is even played by the ensemble to show how minor a character he is. Sure. Or a townsfolk who gives somebody something useful. Sure. Persona. Putting on a mask that you use to deal with people in public, your Clark Kent side hiding your Superman side. There's some interesting moments where Lin-Manuel Miranda drops his persona look in order to talk directly to the audience and say that the Tomcat story was true or something like that. So who is our protagonist? It's the main character. He's there to resolve a conflict, or she, and we, the audience, sympathize with this person. Sure. Sidekick. Madison is that perfect sidekick, isn't he? Backing Jefferson up, helping him with all of his things, but never enforcing whatever Madison's agendas might be, if he even has one. We don't know what it is, except that it's doing whatever Jefferson says. Okay. A stock character. A very recognizable character like the evil stepmother, who we already have formed all our opinions about, and you just have to say it's a wise old man walks in or something, and we're totally caught up with you. Like the temptress in Hamilton, or the tyrant in Hamilton. We don't need to spend much time explaining what kind of characters they are. She's a temptress, okay, I'm all caught up. As opposed to Angelica, who has a lot more things going on with her. Supporting character. Sure. Again, a side character, a background character, not the main character, but also somebody who helps Hamilton like his buddies. Tragic hero who's destroyed because of his own actions, because of his tragic flaw. And a symbolic character who represents some part of society, like King George is oppression, the lack of taxation with representation, and so on and so forth. All right, so that was character. And another thing to take a look at is conflict, which once again boils down to some very classic terms, some very traditional English teachery approaches. The conflict, and there could be a bunch, is what is the problem of the story? What is stopping the protagonist from accomplishing his goal? We've got some different options. Person versus fate, God. The person has been told, this is what's going to happen to you someday, and he's fighting this. Of course, we start the story off with Burr is going to shoot Hamilton. That is his final fate. There isn't another option here. This is guaranteed. And so we see Burr and Hamilton resisting this, struggling with this, considering being friends, but we know that's where the story is going to have to take them. And that makes it more tragic for us as we see this unfolding, even as the characters kind of want to prevent it. Person versus nature. All the survival stories about somebody's on a desert island or in a scary forest, or even being attacked by a tiger or something, although I guess you could say man versus beast. Yeah, all the survival stories out there, right? We don't have a ton of that in Hamilton, but the cut song Valley Forge and you can look up the history there, of course, would have had a lot more about how the conditions are killing them. Person versus person. This one we see an awful lot, and there are several ways you could do it. Two characters want the same thing. Like if two characters both want the throne, they're going to fight over it, aren't they? Or they want opposite things. Hamilton wants a national bank, which became our current financial system, and Jefferson doesn't want a national bank, so they fight. We've got characters that are have very personal conflicts based in their very different ideologies. We've got the cabinet battles, we've got the duel, and of course, King George versus George Washington and all the soldiers in the colonies. Person versus self. Angelica notices, hey, Hamilton, you're the only enemy you ever seem to lose to. Hamilton, you can defeat Jefferson, you can defeat Burr, but when it's your own bad impulses to share everything with the public and never stop talking, you're doomed. Ironically, they go too far the other way in the final conflict, as Hamilton is too cautious in the final duel, and Burr doesn't hold back, doesn't wait for it, and destroys both their lives. Likewise, we see Angelica really debating about whether she should marry Hamilton, and that would be another conflict versus the self. Person versus society. When the whole town or the whole culture don't like how somebody acts and tell them to act differently, or there are rules in the society about you can't do this or that, well, we see Hamilton defeating members of the society like Seabury. We see him defeating King George. But the Reynolds pamphlet society turns against him, and they all start singing Never Gonna Be President Now. Person versus technology. If, we're fighting against the evil computer, we're fighting against the robot army, anything like that, not so much in this story, sure. Another basic list of terms that English teachers tend to want people to know are genre. What type of writing is it? Now, I've heard genre being divided into fiction versus nonfiction. I've heard it being divided into, is it drama or poetry or prose? Because ordinary paragraphs, prose is just like normal book, in paragraphs and so forth. And I've heard it said that those are very, very different and doing very different jobs. Okay. And I've heard genre being broken down into all kinds of little sub-genres like fantasy and mystery and horror, and even more specific ones about which type of fantasy, which type of mystery, right? Because there's lots of types. So sure, we've got lots of specific terms nowadays for if you wanted a New England cozy mystery or steampunk alt history or lots of different things, sure. But there's some big categories, and of course, all genres come with particular expectations. If it's a mystery genre, we're going to have to solve the mystery at the end. That's the promise to the reader. Fantasy generally has a happy ending. Tragedy has a sad ending. Comedy has a happy ending. Like that. If I say, let's go watch a romantic comedy, you do have expectations about what's going to happen in the story because there are rules to romantic comedy. Sure. Hamilton is a musical. Hamilton is historical fiction, but not accurate historical fiction, reimagined, recast. Yeah. But there's a lot we could talk about here. Adaptation. In fact, history is adapted or reimagined with the races changed and the music style changed. And it also started as a mixtape before it became a musical. We've adapted history by making some small changes, like removing the fact that Hamilton had about 8 children during the course of this story, and the Schuyler sisters had a bunch of other siblings, including other sisters and brothers, but these 3 sisters were in a clump together. It is an adventure story of him leaving his island to go to a new land. It is obviously a biography. It was adapted from the actual Chernow biography of what Hamilton got up to. And we get some autobiography in there too, writing your own biography, when he writes the Reynolds pamphlet. Classic. When something is so beloved and revered that it's taught in schools and held up as, one of the really formative works of the genre. We all know what kind of works are taught in school. Obviously, Hamilton, which has teaching value and really, really made everyone fall in love with it, has quite a lot of potential as a classic and teaching tool. Classic literally means over 50 years old, by the way. And classical, which is different than classic, means having to do with Greek and Roman stuff. Go figure. Comedy. It's funny. It has a happy ending. Probably not too serious a topic. We have comedy in this, especially when King George sings, but the whole story is more of a tragedy than a comedy because we know and are even warned from the beginning what is going to happen to the protagonist. Dark comedy, making fun of things considered taboo, making people uncomfortable. Hamilton mocking the decapitated King of France is dark comedy, at least for a second. If it is a diary or a journal, first-person writing meant to just be private, whereas letters are first-person, but those were meant to be sent to one other person, we incorporate, in fact, letters, diaries, all kinds of sources for the information the characters give us, and they quote letters and more public documents, like the Reynolds pamphlet, quite a bit. Pamphlets, right? A shorter nonfiction work that's often like an essay meant to prove a point. Drama. Of course, this is theater. It is meant to be performed. Actors, stage, live audience. Sure. And in fact, the Hamilton film ended up being this kind of production, as opposed to an actual film, which is often done without an audience. An epic is a larger-than-life story. Sure. Epistolary. If you've got a book or short story that's written only in letters. I've also seen things written only in emails, only in tweets. We've gotten cute as we've gotten modern. Well, in fact, the song where Burr and Hamilton are just writing snarky stuff to each other and signing it, "Your obedient servant, A.Ham, A.Burr," that is an epistolary song. Sure. Essay. A short nonfiction piece defending a thesis about why we need to do something or not do something. The Farmer Refuted, the Federalist Papers. Eulogy, a speech in praise of somebody possibly who got killed. And the opening and closing numbers, we are saying goodbye to Hamilton and saying nice and memorable things about him. Even Jefferson and Madison say nice things about him. Fan fiction. If somebody on the internet, before that it was magazines, yes, wanted to write their own story about these characters, Hamilton is out of copyright. You could write a novel about Hamilton, and since the musical, lots of people have. But the fact that we're reimagining Hamilton, Jefferson, and all of that as different races, different music styles, different setting, really does make it feel like fan fiction. And even a touch of fantasy with novels with magic in them. Farce, a totally ridiculous scene. Seabury is trying to debate, and Hamilton is dancing around, mocking him, mocking how he's reading it, just being annoying. Yeah, we've reached the ridiculous farce level. Fiction, a story that is made up, whereas nonfiction is a story that is true or perhaps not a story. You could have a nonfiction story. You can also have a nonfiction biology textbook. Sure. Generational cycle, generational saga. These characters do something and then their children have to deal with it, and their grandchildren. Encanto has a lot of this going on, absolutely. Hamilton and Burr each have children, though, and these children in Dear Theodosia, which got cut, but we did get to see adult children walking around are trying to deal with their parents' feud. Gothic, ghosts, monsters, vampires, spooky scenes. The purple lights in the room where it happens feel a little gothic. Historical fiction. Let's go back in time a few centuries and write a novel that takes place in 1776 or something, sure. This is not a history book. It's retelling stuff out of history, but some of the attitudes are guesses made by modern people. And certainly there's lots of anachronisms, moments that characters wouldn't have said that or acted like this. Yeah. So it's historical fiction, it's not history. Humor, okay, we know what that is. Improvisation, when an actor makes something up instead of just following the scripts. In fact, there were moments that the characters improvised, especially when the actresses decided to sing like Destiny's Child, and Miranda liked that and incorporated that into the musical for real. Legend, a larger-than-life hero. Okay. Linear narrative showing events in order. Mostly, not that intro, but other than that, yeah. Lyrics, the lines of songs, sure. Melodrama, if we're just doing a very exaggerated story with the really, really good guy and the really, really bad guy, and nobody's more complicated than that, everybody's just kind of a cardboard character. Well, by the end, Burr is wearing black and red, and Maria Reynolds is wearing a blood red gown and red lipstick to show that she's the temptress, but mostly we're more complicated than that. Memoir, somebody telling a personal story about their own life. A little bit from Burr and Eliza at the end. Metafiction, when you're self-referencing and making jokes about how this is all theater and all artificial. We've talked about that one. Monomyth or hero's journey or chosen one story, where the hero is dealing with all of these figures that represent parts of his own personality, like the good girl and the bad girl, and Burr is always acting as his foil, emphasizing that he needs to lash out. So yeah, there's aspects of this. Washington as his fatherly support, and Hamilton's dead mother leaving him adrift. Yeah, you could really plug in some hero's journey aspects to this. Well, we know what a musical is. It's a show that has some speaking and some singing and some dancing. If they don't speak at all, it's called an opera. Sure. And yes, it won 16 Tony nominations and then won 11 of those. Mystery, we're unraveling a crime. Not really. The scandal of the Reynolds pamphlet, Hamilton confesses very quickly. Mythopoeia, mythological characters reimagined. Maybe a little for the founding fathers. Narrative, a story. All right, sure. Personal narrative, telling a story about oneself. Nautical story takes place on a ship, not so much. Non-linear narrative when we go out of order. Well, Angelica's splashback in Satisfied certainly mixes things up. Paranoid drama when the character is certain everyone is against them and going to attack them. Hamilton certainly has some of that going on. Parody, we are doing a silly imitation of something, as Hamilton does with King Louis's dead head in a basket. Philosophical story. We are asking some of the big philosophical questions about what is the right way to live and what is the best way to make a country, a little bit. Picaresque tends to be the story of a thief, somebody from the rough side of town, corrupt society. Not really. Maybe the Mariah scenes. A play. Well, this is a musical, but it falls under the bigger category of drama, of course. I've been analyzing the song lyrics as if they are poetry, of course. Postmodern, when we're questioning the nature of what is a story and how does story work and using lots of metafiction. As discussed, we've done some of that. We talked about prose, just not poetry, not theater, just ordinary sentences. This is a realistic story, but it's got a lot of things that don't fit in the time period. There's some romance to it. There's some ridiculing in it, satire, especially the treatment of King George. We see some speeches given, which is like an essay, but there is an audience. Suspense, thriller, a little, but the Will Hamilton die scenes go by pretty quickly. Tall tale, well, an exaggerated backstory that might or might not be true. Yeah, Martha Washington and her tomcat, I guess, maybe. Tragedy. Hamilton dies young, didn't get to accomplish everything he wanted. Why? Because he ran his mouth off, which is his tragic flaw. That's pretty classic. Tragicomedy. We were starting with a tragedy, but we had a happy ending at least. And urban fiction is a story that takes place in a big city. And yeah, this is definitely a story of New York. So there we have lots of English teacher terms, ones that you can apply to lots and lots and lots of other books, of course.